Hi, this is Mr. Bit from Martians versus Roughnecks, and this is the first video of maybe a couple of videos of really introducing Blender, the Blender 3D application to our community. Really, some of you might have used it before, or maybe this is their first time looking at Blender, but part of Martians versus Roughnecks is we provide 3D avatars of all of the 2D NFTs that people own. So when you've got one of those in your wallet, we've got a 3d.martiansversusroughnecks.com website that allows you to connect your wallet and download the 3D model, and then you can use that in Blender, Unreal Engine, a stack of other 3D applications. So, excuse me. Yeah. So, what I'm really going to do in here is go around the Blender application and cover three main areas. One is moving around the 3D space and all of the different ways that you can do that from within Blender. Then moving and transforming the 3D objects in the 3D space. That's the second part. And then the third part, towards the end of the video, is I'm really going to go into what 3D objects are made from and how you can change them and modify them at their base level. Okay, so let's get into it. So what I've got here is Blender is open, as you can see, and this is kind of what's called the default project, and this is the 3D scene that we can see here with just a cube in it, a light, and a camera. So by default, I can just left click on each one of these. This is the light here, and you can see here the Explorer view. I've got the light selected there, so I can either select it here in the view, or I can select it here in the Explorer. So again, to deselect, I'm just moving my cursor off the object and clicking, and the same what I can do in here is click on the cube or click on the camera here as well. If I hold shift down and click on the objects, you can see I'm selecting multiple ones. You can see them highlighted there. I could do the same here, shift and click. I've got them selected, or see there's kind of a hierarchy here. I could right click and select the objects there, and it would select all of them in the underlying hierarchy, and you can kind of delete them from there as well if you wanted to. Okay, so we'll cover it. There's a couple of other selection options later, but I'll cover that later on once we start delving into these icons down here. So we're really going to cover these icons down here, this selection area over here, and we'll delve into these icons up here a little bit as well. One thing to spot as well is when I'm kind of clicking is there's a feedback area down here at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. So that's a good one to draw your eyes to, and I'll kind of cover that later on. So what we're going to cover first is really moving yourself around in the 3D space, because it's a little bit more complex than 2D. In 2D, like if you imagine on a piece of paper, you just got your across the bottom and up, and any combination of those will move you to kind of coordinates on a piece of paper. Whereas in 3D, we've obviously got the vertical as well as the horizontal plane as well. So yeah, we've got an X and a Y and a Z or Z if you're from the US. So yeah, let's take a look at this kind of gimbal over here at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to left click on each one of those letters, and what that does is it gives you a set view on that axis. So if I click on Z, we see we've got like the top view, and that's a nice square view there, so we could manipulate that square quite easily, and it almost looks 2D, right? Okay. Then we've got the X, and that's kind of from the left hand side, and then Y, that's from the right hand side. And what we can do, obviously we can go down, which is like the underneath. So what we can do here as well is if I left click anywhere in this kind of gimbal area and hold and drag the mouse around, I've also kind of almost got like a free look, if you like, which you kind of quite see in some games. So let me flip it the right way up. That's the right way up because the camera's up at the top. And that's one thing, moving in around in 3D space. It's very easy to get kind of disorientated as to which way up things are. So you will kind of get used to that. So that's kind of moving around using the gimbal. Also, what you can do is if I just move my mouse here and I press the middle mouse button in my scroll wheel, keep that held in, and then I can just move the mouse around. So that's another way to move around. That's probably my preferred way to rotate, to kind of free look around. Okay. The next icon here on the right hand side is zoom. So if I hold my left mouse button in and move the mouse forward or backwards, you'll see I get a nice zoom there. The other two ways to do that is just use the scroll wheel. That will go in and out. Or if you hold the control key down and press the mouse button, the mouse scroll wheel in, the middle mouse button, and move the mouse forward and backwards. That's another way to do it. That's kind of my preferred way. So that's zooming. The other one is the pan tool to move the view. So if I left click there, it just kind of moves the view around. Oops, where's my square gone? Oh, there it is. Okay, the other way to do that is to hold the shift key down and press the middle mouse button in and move around. Okay, so basically with the combination of rotating, holding shift in the middle mouse button, that moves that way, and holding control in the middle mouse button, you can pretty much really get to navigate your way around the around the space. And there is a lot of moving around in 3D modeling. So what I tend to do is I keep my left hand hovering over the shift and control key when I'm navigating around the 3D workspace, and you kind of build that muscle memory up. And you can see when I'm pressing shift and control down in this bottom left hand corner, you kind of get a little cheat view of what each of the mouse buttons do. So when I've not pressed any button down, we've got the rotate view on the middle mouse button. If I press shift, it gives me the pan. If I press control, it gives me the zoom. Okay. So that's those icons. The next one is the camera view. Okay, so if we zoom out and look over here, see we've got the camera here. Let me just select it there. Now, if I click on the camera button, what it's going to do is put our point of view as if we were looking through the camera lens. So let me just click on that. See, it moves us around to the point of view of the camera. Now you can have multiple cameras in a scene and you can kind of flick between them, but there's only one that's really set as the main camera. And whichever camera is set as the main camera, that's what the render view is going to be. So whenever you come to do rendering later, it's always through the lens of a camera. Now you can set the focal length and the zoom and the depth of field of a camera, and it's always that we used in for the render. So we'll come to that. We'll come to that later. But the camera is just another object that you can move, the same as the lights. That's another object that you can move, and that has all of its own settings, light strength, etc. And we'll come to that on might come to that on another video, or search it up. Okay, so that's really all of the movement. This last icon here is really just flicks it from perspective to orthographic view. I tend to leave it on perspective view because it's kind of the most realistic, what we're used to. I'm not sure what you use orthographic for. Maybe it's, I don't know, architectural or planning or something, but yeah, I just leave it on perspective. Right, so that's really moving around the 3D space. I hope you, I think, practice on that, get that muscle memory sorted out for moving around. Okay, so what we're going to do now is move over to these icons down the left-hand side. Now, these are more related to manipulating the objects, the 3D objects that are in the space. So the first icon here is the select icon. At the moment, it's set on box. Now you'll see each of these icons, some of them have a little triangle in the bottom right hand corner. That means that there's more than one setting for that tool. In order to see those, you just left click and hold, and that will give you the options. Now, most of the time I tend to stick on tweak, which is just wherever I click on, and you see I've got a rather large mouse pointer, and that's because I have got a big screen and I kind of lose it otherwise. So what I'm going to do is, just for the purposes of this, I'm going to duplicate this cube. Now, you can do that from the menu, but I'm just going to use the hotkey of Shift and D, and then that's going to give me another cube, and I'll do another Shift and D there. So I've got 3 cubes now, all the same size. So if I'm just on tweak here, if I just left click on each one of these, I'm just going to select one at a time. But if I hold Shift down and keep Shift held down and then press click on another one, I can select and deselect those just by keeping Shift. So I've got all of them there. So if I just click off, I've got non-selected. I can see over here that I've got a cube 1, 2, and 3. I can select them there, or I can Shift and click, and I've got all of them there. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the other selection options. We've got select box, which is pretty standard. You can just select, one box at a time. If you were looking in a different view, top view, it's a little bit easier to, select certain objects than this perspective view. Sometimes it'd be a bit tricky to kind of, if I just wanted to select that middle box, it's easier to just kind of click on it, because if I was trying to, see the select square is probably okay with that as well. So if I Shift, move on to select circle. Now select circle expects you to, it will select any kind of handle that's underneath the circle. Now when you can increase the size of the radius to its bonkers size there, so this is probably more used when you're in the edit mode, when you're selecting little or selecting smaller objects. So then the other one is select lasso, which it's a little bit like, I think you can just do a more of a complex selection there in order to cut certain items out. Okay, but I tend to keep it stuck on tweak. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete those 2 objects now. I don't think I need to keep those. So again, I just selected them and I press the delete key while I'm in object mode, and it will delete the object. So let's get back to this cube. So the next item there is the 3D cursor. Now, the 3D cursor is this little circle with the red and white colouring on it. And if I click over here, it basically moves the 3D cursor. So I could move that cube to the 3D cursor by right-clicking and snap the selection, which I've just selected, to the cursor, and it will move it over there. Because as I said at the start, moving objects in 3D space can be a little bit tricky. So the 3D cursor can be really useful for moving it to an object and then moving other objects to that object, if that makes sense. Okay, so we can I can snap the cursor to the world origin and it comes back to the middle, and then I can tell that square, snap that selection back to the cursor and it comes back there, rather than trying to manually move the object in 3 dimensions to a place in 3D space. Snapping is a really good way to handle that. Okay, right, next we move on to the move selected items. Now we've got a couple of options here. You can see we've got the X, Y, and Z arrows, which will just move them in 1 dimension, which is really useful for accuracy. But also we've got these kind of square handles as well, and that will move it along those 2 axes that it kind of intersects with. So this blue one will move it along the X and Y, and it will only move it along the X and Y. It won't move it up. It might look like it's moving up, but it won't. If I kind of get it to here, you'll be able to see that it's only moving along those X and Y locations. If I use the red, it's only going to move it along the Z and Y. So it's just going to move it across along the Y. It's not going to move it across the X at all. And the final one is going to move it across Y and Z. I think I've got the wrong one there. Oh yeah, sorry. This green one is X and Z. There we go. So that's really useful for just moving along those particular planes. Okay. So the next one is rotate. Fairly similar, we've got these circular handles, so that will just kind of rotate it around the Z axis. This will rotate it around the Y axis. And the red will rotate it around the X. Okay, so you kind of really need to get your head around those axes. So I'm just going to Control Z that a couple of times to get it back. Is that back in alignment? Yeah, I think it is. Okay. Right. To the next one, and I'm just going to switch this is the scale. So changing the size of the object. Now by default, it will be set on this scale. So again, we've got similar handles on each one of those axes. So Z, if I click on that handle, left click and drag, it's going to increase the scale along that axis. Now notice it moves both the top and the bottom faces on that axis. The same as if I move it on the Y, it's going to scale it both of those ways. The same on the red. Now again, same with the move. If I use one of these square, kind of the flat handle, it's going to scale it along both of those. So this will scale it on Z and Y. So it's not changing the, it's not, it looks like it's changing the thickness, but it's just really getting wider. Okay, and the same here, we'll scale it that way. And the same there, we'll scale it that way. Okay. Now, that was the way I always used to scale it until I noticed this other, I literally found this, I think it was yesterday. this scale cage is, yeah, I prefer the scale cage option. Now, notice what we do is we get like a little handle now on each one of those. So if I just want to make it a little bit taller, I don't want to change the bottom face, I just want the top face. I'll just left click and move that face out. I can just move that face out. Or if I click on that kind of corner, it'll just scale that corner out. Okay, so I think that gives a bit of a better manipulation than the other scale option. But you know, it's up to you. But just good to know that you've got those two. So the next option is this kind of combine transform icon. So if you click on here, what we've got is basically we've got the move, we've got the rotate and the scale all in one tool. What we haven't got is those combined dimensions. So we can only go on the X, Y, and Z. There's no combined scaling. Whereas like I covered before, we look on this on the move, we've not got these kind of combined handles on here. We can only go along each one of those axes. I don't tend to use this very much, but it's good to know that it's there. Okay, right, nearly there. So we've got Annotate, which allows you to kind of write notes on there, probably good for technical drawings, etc. I've not used those yet. We can put measurements of angles, etc. down, probably okay for technical and CAD, even though Blender's not really a CAD tool. You could do some rudimentary, architectural plans in there and put the measurements on there. The last icon on the left-hand side is just allows us to add some primitive shapes in there. So let me just show you that. So if I click and hold and then do add cube, it's asking me where I want the first point to be of the square. So I'm going to left click and drag, and I'm just going to draw it on that square there. Then when I release, it's going to ask me, it's going to expect another input for the height of the cube. And then I click again, and that it's drawn a cube, and the loop starts again. So we could say, well, I don't want a cube, I want a cylinder. And again, it's going to be click and drag, draw that first, what the 2D base is going to be, and then it's going to ask for the height. Okay, there's a few more. Quite an easy way of, putting in a particular size of cube, because the other way to add primitives in is they tend to add in just a default size, whereas this is quite a good way to add in one to the size that you want. Okay, right, so I think that's that covered. Let me go back. I'm just going to tidy up a little bit here. Again, I'm just using the shift left click, and then I'll delete, and you'll see those disappear when I press delete. So that's covered moving ourselves around the 3D space. So yeah, you should be really good at that now. Get used to doing that. It will take a while for it to go in, but it did for me anyway. And then manipulating the shapes in the 3D space and transforming them, resizing them, moving them. Yeah, it's kind of covered that. So the last part of the video is really going to be what makes up a 3D shape. Okay, because we can see this cube here. It just looks like, a block, doesn't it? One piece, but it's actually made up of, I would say, 3 subparts. And in order to do that, what we'll do is we'll go down into wireframe mode, and I'll talk about these shading options up at the top here. So let's go down to wireframe mode. There we go. We can just see the wireframe of the cube there. Okay. Now, each of these increase the complexity of the shading that's in the scene here. So the least computationally expensive is on the left and the most is on the right. So we've got wireframe, then we've got the solid mode, then we've got a material preview. If I had a color on this, it would be showing a color. And then if there was like a texture, it would be kind of a texture preview. But then the last one is the render preview. So based on the complexity, if it was a fairly complex texture, that would be the best one that you'd use just for before you did your final render for checking the lighting and things like that. So let's go back to the wire view. What we're going to do is select this cube now. Okay, now at the moment, everything has been in object mode, so we are selecting just objects. Whereas if you want to make changes to that object, we need to go into edit mode. Okay, and you see it changes slightly. And next to the mode, there's another set of icons that allow us to select the different sub objects of a 3D object. Sub objects? I don't know. Let's call them pieces. I don't know. So there's three main pieces. One is the vertex, which is the dot, and that's what I'm going to select now. There, I've got one vertex of the cube selected. The other part of the cube is the edge, which is the lines between two vertexes. So here we go. These are all different edges, and we can kind of modify all of them. And again, if I've got shift, I can kind of select multiple ones. Same with the if I've got, there you go, I've got a few vertices selected there. Also, here's a tip: is you can press Control and press plus, and that will go through and kind of pick up more, and then I think you can press minus to kind of deselect unless you've got all of them selected. So so yeah, we've done the vertex, we've got the edge, and the final one, when all edges are selected, then that kind of fills in the face, or we can go into face mode, and then we've got that face selected. See, we've got that little dot there. We can select that face. We can select that face. Okay, so let's go back to vertex mode. What I'm going to do is just select one vertex, and then we'll go back to the move tool, and then we can just move that one vertex in whatever dimension we want. Okay, so that's kind of manipulated that shape, and the only reason I've got it in wireframe is just because you can see all of them. So what I can do then is I can select that edge, and I can just change that edge, or I could select multiple edges and move those up together. Okay, so you can make what was looking like a really nice cube into a bit of a weird shape. The other thing is also we've got the face. So if I select the face, I can kind of move that up and down. Okay. So yeah, I think that's it. Coming up to 30 minutes now. I hope you've managed to sit through that video. We've covered quite a few things. We've covered moving around the 3D space, manipulating the objects in the 3D space, and then editing the object. Now, the thing to always remember here is I'm going to go back out of edit mode, back into object mode now, and I'll just set, and we can see the horrendous thing I did to the cube. Again, you've always got Control Z to undo everything. I hope you found this video useful. and I'll probably do another one. Thanks very much. Until next time.